Fox 10 News and WSFA 12 News present Alabama's District 2 Democratic Congressional Debate. Now, presented by the Mobile Chamber of Commerce. From Government Plaza in downtown Mobile, candidates Anthony Daniels and Shomari Figures. Sponsored by All In Credit Union and Southern Cancer Center.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome from the Mobile County Commission Chambers. I'm Valerie Lawson from WSFA in Montgomery.
And I'm Lenny Slagan from Fox 10 News here in Mobile. Thank you for joining us for this election 2024 District 2 Democratic debate in Alabama's newest congressional district.
This is a sponsored event between our stations, the Mobile Chamber and the Alabama Democratic Party. The new Alabama map for District 2 will impact communities in both of our viewing areas. Our TV stations are teaming up once again so you can hear directly from the candidates running for that seat.
And we started with a crowded political forum back in February featuring the field of candidates who were vying for this spot to represent the district. None received more than 50% of the vote. The voters, of course, are going to head back to the polls April 16th for a runoff, and that'll be before the general election.
The two candidates vying for the 2nd Congressional District are Alabama House Minority Leader Anthony Daniels and former aide to U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, Shomari Figures.
Each will have 1 minute, 60 seconds to answer their questions, and they will also have 30 seconds for rebuttal. We would also remind the audience to hold their applause until the very end of the debate and to please silence their cell phones and know that no pictures are allowed during this time.
Now let's meet the candidates. They will each have 1 minute to introduce themselves, and we will start with Representative Daniels.
I'm Anthony Daniels, the Alabama House Minority Leader, but also a candidate for Congress. I grew up in Midway, Alabama, raised by my grandparents who were sharecroppers, graduated from Bullitt County High School, went on to Alabama A&M where I received my degrees in elementary education and special education. At the age of 23, I was the chairman of the National Education Association, where I went to Washington, D.C. to work out at the NEA's headquarters to work on the issue and prioritizing the issue of college access and affordability. In a year and a half into my term, we passed the College Cost and Reduction Act. I then returned to Alabama to start teaching. I taught elementary school, then elected to the Alabama House of Representatives and elected Minority Leader in 2017. I have experience of working across the aisle and getting things done. Most recently, I passed legislation that eliminated the income tax on overtime pay, which is putting more money in the pockets of hourly workers. And most recently, I introduced a piece of legislation to give up to $2,000 to mothers and families that are re-entering the workforce. And so I'm asking you for your support on April 16th.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Mr. Figures, it is your turn to introduce yourself. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you to the Chamber and to the host for having us here today. Listen, I'm Shomari Figures. I'm running for Congress because I believe Congress and I believe federal government can do good for the people and the communities and the towns and places of this district. Because this district, this is home for me. This is where I was born. This is where I was raised, just a couple miles from here in Tobinville. This is the place that created me, where I was educated, where I learned to hunt, where I learned to fish, where I grew up in my grandfather's church. These are the people and the places that are responsible for me being me in the first place, right here in this district. These are the people and places and the schools here that place me on a pathway to go off into federal government service and work in government at the highest levels, working for President Obama, working as a top official at the Department of Justice, and also spending several years working in Congress. Listen, I don't agree with how federal government works in many respects, but I know how it works. And I know how we can best position it to make it work as best as it possibly can for the people and the towns in this district, the new District 2.
All right, and just as a reminder before Valerie begins with the line of questioning, you all both have a monitor on either side. That is a reminder of the amount of time you have to answer the question. The green is a safe zone, the yellow is wrap it up, and the red is it's almost time to stop.
Okay, our first question. Inflation continues to negatively impact many Americans. Gas prices are high. Food costs are at 40-year highs. Mortgage rates have increased. What do you think needs to happen to lower the cost of these things? We will start with you, Mr. Daniels, and you have 1 minute.
Absolutely. Inflation is very important, and many of the families here in the state of Alabama across the country are having a significant impact. But what we have to do is make certain that we start reproducing and growing our economy within the state of Alabama, producing products again as Americans and as Alabamians. And so that we can also encourage more competitiveness so that we can drive down the cost of the goods and services that we're experiencing right in our stores and our homes. We have to also leverage the federal government, local government, and state government on figuring out ways to start building affordable housing, workforce housing. What we have the benefit of in this district is about 5 military bases, and working with those military bases and acquiring land so that the purchase of goods and services to be able to build homes at a more affordable rate, partner with the developer, partner with the local city and county governments in order to put up some quality housing that's affordable for our citizens.
Thank you very much. Mr. Figures, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, so listen, the pain of inflation is real, and it's something that too many families that are struggling to make ends meet are dealing with every single day. We were in Butler County a couple weeks ago, and I ran into a woman who is a retiree. She's already receiving Social Security, and she's worried about the cost of inflation continuing to impact the monthly decisions she has to make regarding whether or not she can spend her money on her prescription medication or keeping the lights on or paying rent. So it's real, and it's hitting people in very personal ways. Listen, I think we have to do everything that we can here in the state of Alabama to increase our output, to make sure that we are preparing our workforce for the jobs of the future, making sure that we're doing everything we can to work with organizations to recruit in and bring in higher paying jobs with higher wages, better benefits, and not only just getting those companies here, but make sure that we're investing in our workforce development in a manner that will help us retain those companies and attract even more companies to come in and build our economy from the ground up.
Thank you. Mr. Daniels, you have a 30-second rebuttal.
So when you're dealing with the economy, you have to make certain that you're engaging business as well as the academic arena. What we're finding right now in the state of Alabama is that there's not a conversation at the federal, state, and local level. We're very proud to have the Chamber of Commerce in these different regions that are facilitating some of these conversations. But we got to understand what our role is in the federal government. We have to be able to bring home the bacon to ensure that our local communities can be on the trajectory to grow our economy. And also in the K-12 system, we got to make certain that we're preparing the workforce in a stronger way.
Thank you very much. Mr. Figures?
Yes, I generally agree. We cannot have a workforce development conversation without first having an education conversation, and that starts with treating our teachers as they are the single most important professions to the future of this district, of this state, and of this country. They literally educate every other profession that comes through this, that works in our economy. And so it has to start there with investments in our education systems, as well as investments in building out a better workforce, investments in apprenticeship programs, workforce development programs, because with that, we can build an economy for the future.
Thank you.
Our next question deals with artificial intelligence. It's going to fundamentally change how we live and work. There are some who argue AI is very powerful and there's a need for new government regulations to govern how it's being used. However, others argue that too much regulation would harm the Americans and innovation and also give our adversaries an advantage like China. What comes closer to your view, and as a member of Congress, how would you approach AI? Mr. Figures, we'll start with you first.
Yeah, I think we have to first, we have to have a complete understanding of what the potential of artificial intelligence is, both positive and negative. One thing about it is we know it's here, we know it's growing, we know it's rapidly expanding, we know it's impacting everything from healthcare to job decisions, to from job opportunities to journalism, to automobiles and self-driving cars. So we have to understand it. And then I think we have to be responsible, be reformed, be educated about the regulations that we're putting in place that balance the interests of making sure that we have jobs here that are viable for the future economy that's going to incorporate and continue to incorporate artificial intelligence. But at the same time, making sure we're doing it in a way that promotes safety, promotes care and concern for the future of jobs actually existing and not losing jobs entirely to artificial intelligence. More importantly, we have to make sure, again, that our workforce is ready for the jobs of the future.
Thank you. Mr. Daniels, what is your view on regulations on AI, and as a member of Congress, how would you approach it?
So right now, the Congressman Ted Lieu and a bipartisan study commission he proposed putting together a bipartisan study commission to really look at AI, because you do have to strike a delicate balance. You can't go so far as to where you're losing or eliminating the jobs that are within the community or within the region. We know that 11 out of 13 of the counties in this district are rural communities. And in many instances, they don't have the infrastructure needed to be able, needed to be able to carry on their day-to-day work. And so what we have to do is be very careful about how we approach AI and creating more of a balanced approach so that we avoid against eliminating the jobs that are in these rural communities that don't have the infrastructure to be able to go and get trained in technology or anything to support AI jobs that require them to be in technology or computers in general. And so we got to strike a delicate balance, and we have to make certain that we allow this study commission to be able to send some recommendations that's not going to impact us globally or domestically.
Thank you. Mr. Figures, your response to that?
Yeah, so one thing about our economy here in the United States as a whole is we cannot afford to be put in a position where we continue to fall behind the global economy and other chief nations and chief competitors in terms of output for various technical means. And so, AI will certainly need to be regulated, but we must do so responsibly, and we must do so in a way that keeps that top of mind. America has to be able to compete. America can no longer continue to fall behind our global competitors.
And again, Mr. Daniels, your rebuttal.
Absolutely. And so as we create that delicate balance, we have to make certain that as representatives, we have to make certain that we're paying attention to our district. You're sent to Washington, D.C. to represent the interests of your district. And so sometimes the interests of your district conflict with the interests of the overall strategy from a national standpoint. And so in this district, there are communities, 11 out of 13 counties, that are without the appropriate broadband. And so we got to make certain that we start on first base for those areas and build on in our cities like Montgomery and Mobile.
With millions of Americans uninsured and millions more paying high rates for care deemed unsatisfactory, how do we solve the health care crisis in America? Mr. Daniels, we'll start with you.
And so as we see many Americans that are struggling to pay for their prescription drug costs, I have experience and worked about 2 years ago on reducing the prescription drug costs here in the state of Alabama. We also saw that the president has reduced, through legislative act, reduced the prescription drug costs where insulin is now down to $35. The affordability of the healthcare prescription drug costs has given us a significant gain. But the state of Alabama has, with its failure to expand Medicaid, has put Alabamians at a disadvantage. And so we have to make certain that we're doing things to ensure that the state of Alabama is able to start over with getting that 100% match from the federal government through expanding Medicaid, so that the fiscal side of it is not the topic of conversation of a reason not to accept Medicaid expansion. And so what I want to do is introduce legislation to allow Alabamians to be able to start over from that first year of expanding Medicaid so that they can get access to the proper health care that they need.
Mr. Figures.
So, state of Alabama, if you're born here, you're expected to die before anybody else born in the United States with the exception of 2 states. We have the 3rd lowest life expectancy in the United States of America here. Barely expected to live beyond your 60s if you're born in the state of Alabama. That is entirely unacceptable, and that is entirely something that we can actually fix and take steps to do. Medicaid expansion, which something the state legislature and the governor have been unable to do to this point, is a critical first step. So in Washington, one of the first things that I would do is propose legislation to, again, re-incentivize the state of Alabama to expand Medicaid, which will provide health insurance to an estimated 330,000 people who are the most vulnerable people in this state right now, to get them the ability to go to a doctor. Listen, this is America. Healthcare, I believe, is a right. We should not be in a country where we can afford to find money for a variety of things, but we can't put somebody in Jackson, Alabama in front of a doctor to make sure that they're not dying from something that is curable or avoidable. So that will always be a priority for me. And it's not a matter of if we fix this issue. This is a must. People are dying far too early here in this state.
Thank you. Mr. Daniels, a 30-second rebuttal.
So expanding Medicaid will solve a number of problems. We've had approximately 17 hospital closures in the last 11 years in the state of Alabama. And so when we see in Monroe County where the maternal care unit has closed due to only 40% of the individuals that are going and being seen at the hospital are uninsured. And so Medicaid expansion will certainly be a benefit for the state of Alabama. But we have to also make certain that we're incentivizing OBGYNs and primary care physicians to be able to come to the state of Alabama as well.
Thank you. Mr. Figures.
Listen, when I worked for President Obama, I one of my responsibilities was building out the teams that actually went into HHS that was actually implementing the Affordable Care Act. And so I've seen firsthand what progress in this space can look like. That was the first time we offered Medicaid expansion up to the state of Alabama, and they did not take us up on it at the time, and they haven't since then. But at the end of the day, look, it's beyond Medicaid expansion. It's our rural hospitals. It's our maternal health care here. We have to have the resources in this state to be able to address these real life and death issues.
Thank you.
Well, from health care to securing the border, it's a major topic in American politics today. Some call the situation at the southern border an invasion, demanding that something be done. Do you think there's a crisis at the southern border, and should Congress take action to stop illegal immigration? Mr. Figures, 60 seconds to answer.
So our immigration system is broken and has been for some time. That's not a Republican cause. That's not a Democratic cause. That's an American immigration system cause. We have not passed substantial, significant immigration legislation in this country in far too long, since 1960s. Look, I know I'm well aware of the conditions at the border. I covered immigration when I worked in Congress. I've been to the border myself personally on multiple occasions. I've seen firsthand the issues that are there present at our country's border. We must take sensible steps to reform our immigration system. We have to. And we can do that in a way that prioritizes securing our border. We can do that in a way that does not sacrifice the founding values of this country, that does not lose sight of our history and the understanding that most of the people in this country are the product of immigrants. Obviously, most African Americans in this country are the product of slavery, but the vast majority of Americans are the product of immigrants. And so we can figure out a way to reform our immigration system without sacrificing those core values and slamming the door on people after we've benefited from being here.
Thank you. Mr. Daniels, your response.
Absolutely. I think, there was a bipartisan effort to address immigration reform. We do need a comprehensive immigration reform package where both parties are in agreement. I think that there is some alignment. Increasing the number on the administrative side, increasing the administrative side to making certain that we're getting immigrants over here and they're getting there legally. Making certain that we're increasing the number of Border Patrol agents to ensure that we're protecting the border. Yes, it is a crisis at the border, but I think that as members of Congress, we have to make certain that we come together and address immigration reform in a real way that's measured and that's evidence-based as to how we protect our interests, but also those individuals that are coming over here, making certain that we're creating a process for them to be over in the United States legally so that they can live and enjoy the same freedoms that we enjoy.
And Mr. Figures, your 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, so look, listen, my wife's parents, my children's grandparents immigrated to this country because they know the promise of what America, they knew what the promise of what America could be. And so this is personal for us. So listen, our reforms that we put in place here, they have to be mindful of the contributions, the positive contributions that immigrants have made to this country for decades. And they cannot stoke fear, and they cannot be rooted in hate and creating fear.
Next question. Gun violence is a national concern. Depending on your party, there is a push for more gun control, in particular for semi-automatic weapons. Do you support increased gun control laws? Mr. Daniels, we will start with you. You have 1 minute.
I absolutely do, and which is why I fought in the Alabama legislature against the permitless carry bill that allowed an individual that's mentally ill or any individual to be able to carry a weapon without getting a permit. And so I also support a national ban on Glock switches. What we found is the gun violence in Alabama and some of our small cities that have increased significantly. I had a friend over the weekend to get killed essentially with gun violence, just visiting and taking his wife on a trip in Nashville. And so he was killed. A gunman came into a coffee shop, and he ended up he got into an argument with this guy, and he went out to his car and came back and killed him. And so gun violence in this state, in this country, is worse. And so what we have to do is make certain that we do a universal background check, make certain that we eliminate the access of anyone carrying a military-style weapon in this country, and get back to the basics of making certain that we're protecting ourselves from ourselves.
Thank you. Mr. Figures, do you have a solution for gun violence? 1 minute.
The gun violence issue is another one that's touching people personally. I spent New Year's Day just a few months ago at a cemetery at a balloon release from a high school classmate of mine, or a high school friend of mine, former basketball teammate of mine who was shot and killed a few years ago. And while at that same cemetery, stopped by the grave of another childhood friend who had been killed just a few months before that. And on the way to the cemetery, got the phone call that a kid that was killed in downtown Mobile on New Year's Eve night was the son of a high school classmate of mine. I have family members that have been victimized by gun violence, and my story is not unique. It is far too common. And so it's something that we absolutely have to address. Listen, I am certainly in favor of doing everything that we can to keep guns out of the hands of people who don't want them. Alabama's permitless carry law made no sense, and it still makes no sense, and it is costing lives, and it is putting everybody in jeopardy, from our seniors in their homes to our law enforcement officers on the street. But at the end of the day, we have to do what we can to expand our means to be able to get guns sensibly out of the hands of people who should not have them, and that includes our children.
Thank you. Mr. Daniels, 30-second rebuttal.
Absolutely. And so what we found is the permitless carry law that we're fighting so vehemently in the House floor has proven to have an 11% increase in homicide rates for those states that passed it. And we know that. And so that's why it's important that the federal government step in and do a national ban on Glock switches as well as universal background checks. The other thing that we have to do to play offense on this issue is we have to make more investments in Boys and Girls Club and after-school programs so that our children have places to go and they're learning, and it's like an enrichment for them. And so we got to make more investments in our community in order to prevent violence long-term.
Mr. Figures, 30 seconds.
I agree that we have to invest more in the community programs to wrap our kids in controlled environments and safe environments and bring back the community sense, or the sense of community that many of us were raised with. Listen, Glock switches are already illegal. In my time at the Department of Justice, we saw the prevalence of these Glock switches skyrocketing across the country, and we did everything that we could then to stop the proliferation of them. So we have to do that. But more importantly, we need to look at red flag laws. We need to be able to go and get guns out of people who have expressed an intent to commit violence and who should not be in possession of a deadly weapon.
Thank you.
All right, question number 6 now. With the current Congress on track to pass even fewer bills than the infamous Do Nothing Congress in the late 40s, how would you justify the salaries and benefits paid to members of Congress who seem to be accomplishing so little on the behalf of the American people? Should there be greater accountability and consequences for a lack of productivity? Mr. Figures, we'll start with you first.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was rain I was hearing. Listen, there has to be measures of accountability, as with any form of employment. One thing in Congress that regardless of whether it's myself or Mr. Daniels who goes there, we will be accountable to voters every 2 years. This is not a Senate seat where we're up for every 6 years. But at the end of the day, look, everybody has to be committed to the job that they're doing. You have to make sure that you're giving it your all. You have to make sure that you are taking the values and the core characteristics of who you are to this job every day to really go to bat for the people in the district. People need federal government to be there for them. Life is not easy for far too many people in this district. And so we have to have somebody that's going to go there to understand that and lay it all on the map for them, right? So so Congress, too often, the attention is paid to the dysfunction in Congress, but we have real fighters in Congress. We have people that are going to go up there, like myself, and lay it all on the line for the people of this district.
Thank you. Mr. Daniels.
So with my experience in the Alabama legislature, we're in a super minority, and so I'm the super minority leader. And so in those efforts, I've had the ability to negotiate and find areas of common ground in order to push through legislation that's meaningful and that's impactful to the citizens within the state of Alabama. That'll be the same approach that I take in Congress, finding areas of common ground that both parties can agree with and move legislation that's meaningful. The gridlock is going to be the same today and tomorrow. And so there's no one that's going to be able to go up there and have a magic wand to solve the problem. But having the experience of working in a super minority and being able to move legislation is someone that has experience to be able to move the ball down the field. We don't need more people the gridlock. We don't need to increase the gridlock. We need an adult in the room, somebody to bring community to the chaos that exists in Washington, D.C. And that's what I would do.
Mr. Figures, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Listen, there are people who work in Congress that love this country dearly and that want to push it forward. There are staff that work diligently on these issues that are the single most, the smartest people on these issues across the country. I know because I've been one of them. I have worked in Congress. I have worked across the aisle. I spent years pushing legislation, drafting legislation, building relationships with people. So I know how committed people are to this country. And if elected, I will take that same commitment back to Washington, D.C.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Daniels, you have the final say.
Yeah, absolutely. And back in 2006 to 2008, I had an opportunity to work with late Senator Ted Kennedy and Chairman George Miller and then former Congressman Arthur Davis in the Bush administration on creating the College Cost Reduction Act, which was built around my story. And so I've seen Congress actually work. I've been engaged in working in Congress, working with members of Congress as an advocate for the National Education Association. So it can happen. We can resolve and solve problems in Congress.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your answers so far. Right now, we're going to take a quick break. And when we continue, we will continue the election 2024 District 2 Democratic debate in just 2 minutes.
Fox 10 News and WSFA 12 News present Alabama's District 2 Democratic Congressional Debate.
All right, well, thank you. Short break there. Hopefully you were able to get some water. Welcome back to our special election 2024 District 2 Democratic debate. We are hearing from the candidates in the upcoming April 16th runoff. So let's get back to our line of questioning.
The next question, what can be done to improve our schools? We face growing challenges from other countries. How do we make sure we are leaders in this area? Mr. Daniels, we will start with you. 1 minute.
Thank you. Some of the things that we can do with our schools is we have to have universal pre-K. Right now, the statistic that every dollar invested in early childhood saves you $7 in corrections. And if we know that that is the foundation, the brain development from birth to the age of 5 is 90% of the brain development. And so we got to invest more on the front end. We also have to focus on workforce development as early as middle school, but also use summertime and after-school programs that actually has the ability to be able to meet children where they are in order to raise their level, whether they're level 1, 2, 3, or 4. And also making certain that we're doing more preparation for getting them college and career ready, while at the same time focusing for them to be able to go directly to the workforce. So we got to make certain that we add to some of the things that we're already doing so that we can be in a really good position to be productive long term.
Thank you. Mr. Figures, what can we do to improve our schools? You have 1 minute.
Listen, this is an issue that we absolutely have to address, and we have to address head on. Students here in the state of Alabama read at the 6th worst literacy rate in the nation. That means our children can barely read compared to their peers across the country. That means that they are not on pace to be reading a grade level by 3rd grade. That means they're not on pace for the positive life outcomes that we see study after study associate with their ability to be able to read to grade level by that critical metric. I think it starts with showing our teachers and our school support personnel that we need you, we value you, we appreciate you, we respect you, we understand the challenges that you face and what is needed for you to be successful. We understand that our current system in the state of Alabama does not show you that love, does not show you that care or that concern. Our teachers here, who we expect to take care of everybody else's children every single day in this state, they get 0 paid days off when they decide to have a child of their own. They are paid in the bottom half of teachers in this country. And we're sending far too many of them in this district to teach in schools that are the exact same schools that the kids' grandparents and great-grandparents went to school in. So we have to make these investments, and we have to do it now.
Thank you. Mr. Daniels, 30
Working
seconds.
conditions is certainly a major factor. Increasing salaries, of course, to show our appreciation. But we got to focus on data, which is why I have a program in 9 of the 18 Title I schools in my district currently, where I'm paying teachers $50 an hour from the after-school program to focus on meeting children where they are, increasing the rigor for those students, whether they're level 1, they're beginning average level, all the way to advanced. And so what we're looking at, that we'll see the data from that here in another month so that we can be competitive on test scores and those children have a shot at life and an opportunity long term.
Thank you. Mr. Figures, 30 seconds.
I believe in the power of data as well. And unfortunately, the data here in Alabama is not good. The data is telling us that the average teacher that's coming into a classroom for the first year is leaving the classroom by the 3rd year. Right? There is value in being able to invest in our teachers to promote a retention rate that keeps them in that classroom for 20, 30, 40 years, as many of us had the benefit of learning from teachers from that circumstance. My wife was a former educator, so I understand the day-to-day struggles from her, what they are actually going through in this classroom. And so we absolutely have to take this serious. This is the issue of the future in this district.
Thank you.
Now on to Alabama's economy. Alabama's economy relies heavily on the automotive, aerospace, shipbuilding industries, all of which are located in Alabama's new 2nd District. Will you commit to supporting the port, Alstom, and Airbus, Mr. Figures?
Look, absolutely. A large part of the economy in this state and in this region depends on this city that we're sitting in, just right across the street here, right across Water Street, the Port of Mobile. It is the gateway to the state of Alabama's economy. It always has been, it always will be. We are doing everything, I know state and local leadership and county leadership is doing everything that they can to make sure that that remains as such. We're in the midst of a port expansion. We're also making numerous other port-related infrastructure enhancements to this region. And this is not just a Mobile issue. This is for the state. Whether it's building a new bridge to expand capacity for getting cargo across I-10, which is the longest interstate in the United States of America, to deepening our port to be able to take on more cargo that's coming in and injected into the American economy, or relocating our airport to downtown here, which will also help enhance the port's impact. Look, at the end of the day, we have to support these projects. We have to support growth in this district to create the jobs that are needed to sustain.
And Mr. Daniels, talk about your support for the port, Alstom, and Airbus.
Absolutely. With the port, we have to make certain that we are making investments on dredging the port so that they are able to have more larger ships to be able to come into to shore. We also have to make certain that with the defense industry and the industry that we have down here in the Mobile area, that we're making more investment and bringing more dollars to this region. And as it relates to the airport, certainly with the airport moving downtown, there's going to require more emphasis and more attention from the federal delegation in making certain that we're making those investments and allocating dollars and working with our senators to allocate more dollars to building out a world-class airport. And so Mobile is just, is the place where I think a lot of people are looking to relocate to. And so we have to make certain that those investments to accommodate the job growth and the population growth with more jobs and opportunity are down here. And also the start of new businesses. We have to make certain that we're making investments and attracting more businesses that are related to the port industry and the port, as well as the defense industry as a whole.
Mr. Figures, your rebuttal.
Listen, I cannot explain the importance of the port to this region and to this city. Mobile it's literally the port city. It's the port city. That is our city's nickname. That is from a recognition of the vitality that port has to the economy in this entire state. And so we have to do everything that we can to support it, to support its growth, to support its operations, and make sure that we're developing the workforce that's necessary to take on those jobs as the port continues to expand its footprint and its impact across this region of the country.
And Mr. Daniels.
And in my experience in the legislature, we've made investments to the port. We've made investments in helping and supporting Alstom. We made investments into this entire region. Because in 2015, I stood alongside my legislative colleagues to fight to ensure that the dollars that other parts of the state was trying to take away from Mobile as a result of the BP oil spill money, I stood with Mobile to fight against the rest of the state to ensure that those dollars remain right here where the devastation actually happened. And so I have experience. I have a voting record. I have evidence of fighting to ensure that Mobile receives its fair share. And in Congress, I will do the same thing.
Question 9 deals with regulatory changes. Due to congressional inaction, many federal agencies often enact ideologically driven regulations that many chambers of commerce say can hurt businesses. The Biden administration is reportedly considering several thousand regulatory changes this year. Do you have a problem with this, and what should be the solution? Mr. Daniels, we'll start with you.
I think that whenever you're trying to make significant changes anyway, whether it's the President of the United States or whether it's leadership in the Senate or the House of Representatives, you have to make certain that you're paying close attention to what your district requires. I'm not supporting any legislation or any movement for executive order that directly, indirectly, negatively impact the district. You're elected to represent a district, and so as someone that have experience representing a district, I would not allow anything negatively to impact our district. And so we'll look at it. We'll look at it with an open mind to ensure that district first, and party does not come before district.
Thank you. Mr. Figures?
Look, I have the privilege of being a small business owner myself, as does my wife. as are many members of my family. My mother has owned small businesses. So we understand the impact that regulations have on businesses, and not just federal regulations, whether it's state, whether it's local, whether it's county. When you own a small business, you look at it through that lens. You understand how it impacts not just your bottom line, but your ability to operate and provide the services that you're providing to the community, that provides the jobs that people have in providing for their families. So we understand it, and I think you have to look at these issues through that lens first and foremost. In analyzing any sort of regulation, you have to understand what it's going to do. And you have to understand how it's going to impact businesses, how it's going to impact communities, how it's going to impact plans, growth, expansion, how it's going to impact workers. Right? We have to assess them before we can just make blanket statements about whether or not we support or oppose them.
Mr. Daniels, 30 seconds.
We must be as careful as we were careless in other policies that have negatively impact our region, our state, and our communities. And so what I'll do is, as I've done, as I do every day as a legislator, is evaluate the impact that it's going to have on my district. And so the district and being in the House of Representatives, you're there to represent the interests of your constituents and making certain that whatever it is that you're voting on and what you're supporting, that you're keeping an open mind to ensure that this is something that positively impact your district. And if it negatively impact your district, you have to fight against it.
Mr. Figures?
Look, in Congress, I would also I would work very diligently to know that every time that we're proposing or considering a regulation, that we're likewise also proposing or considering ways to support our small businesses, particularly those businesses that are owned by historically disenfranchised or underrepresented groups, to make sure that as we are looking at businesses, that we're looking at doing everything we can to make sure that each business in our district has the opportunity to access capital, to access resources, to access whatever is necessary to be able to be as productive as they possibly can be in our communities.
Thank you.
All right, our next question. TikTok ban. Several influencers in Alabama, maybe some in this room, have TikTok accounts, and they have joined in protest in Washington calling for Congress to ban TikTok. What is your take on banning this social media platform? Mr. Figures, you have 60 seconds.
Put me on blast to the kids first. Huh? But listen, I think, look, the concerns with TikTok are ingrained in concerns about national security and international security. And so I think, whenever you're dealing with issues of national security, which is something that I've, had the experience in working in, both in Congress and at the Department of Justice, you have to take such concerns seriously. And so you have to analyze it. You have to make sure that you understand what the concerns are, making sure that you understand the legitimacy or illegitimacy of the concerns before you just jump on a particular company. I will say, as a small business owner, look, I have to analyze with a very, very sharp magnifying glass any policy or any law that any body of government is looking to pass that targets a specific business. Because if they could do it to that business, they could do it to my business. So we have to understand what we're looking at, making sure that we verify the legitimacy of the national security concerns, and then act appropriately.
Thank you. Mr. Daniels, do you think TikTok needs to be banned?
So I know that this has been an issue that has been arising here for the last several months and almost a year. But anything that impacts the national security, I have to take very seriously as a member of Congress, because my oath is making certain that I'm defending the United States of America and our interests. And so what you're seeing play out on TikTok, I know that there are some people talking about it impedes the freedom of speech, your freedom of speech. But some things that are impacting the mindsets of people and the things that are driving. I know that it's all looking at because who owns, which country kind of owns, or the persons that own TikTok. And so I know that that's been an issue as well. And so for me, I'll get my advice from a national security standpoint and briefings to determine what the steps I would take in whether banning or not banning TikTok.
And Mr. Figures, your rebuttal?
The counties in this district mostly are rural, have incredibly high poverty rates. People have problems that they need help solving, and TikTok ain't one of them, right? People need jobs. People need better schools. People need to know that they have a future that their kids are going to want to return to the same communities that they grew up in. And so this is not to diminish the sincerity of any national security concern. But at the end of the day, we're going to Washington to represent the interests of these people in this district, and that's what I would take there first and foremost.
And Mr. Daniels, final thought on TikTok.
Well, I think that as Mr. Figures mentioned, I think that it's also important for us to pay attention to what we have going on right here in our communities. As a former educator, I see every day the challenges that some of our school systems are faced with. As someone that understands that the state of Alabama didn't expand Medicaid, I look at the challenges of our hospital closures. And so TikTok is a real issue, and that's something that we'll have to address. But I want to make certain that we're addressing the issues that are right here in our communities as well.
At the end of 2025, major portions of the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act will expire. This includes the expansion of the child tax credit, the increase in the standard deduction, and provisions lowering tax on small family-owned and privately held businesses. If Congress fails to act, there will be automatic tax increases on nearly every American. Do you support or oppose extending the 2017 tax changes? Why or why not? And is there anything you would do differently? Mr. Daniels, we will start with you.
So I have the great fortune of last week introducing a piece of legislation in anticipation for a yea or nay vote on this particular issue. I increased the child care tax credit, which gives businesses, employers an opportunity to pay up to $2,000 or reimbursement or direct payment to a provider for families that want to come back into the workforce. And so for me, I tend to think that there will be a negotiation to extend it. It may not be at the same rate of 21%, but it may be somewhere in the middle. But for me, I cannot openly support increasing the taxes since being that we just came out of COVID. And there's so many businesses that have gone under. 40% of black-owned businesses have gone on since COVID and won't come back. And so I have to pay attention to the district and making certain that we're putting business in a great position. But we have to make certain that those dollars are trickling down to ensure that we're increasing the amount of money that their employees are making at the same time.
Thank you. Mr. Figures?
I happened to be working in Congress at the time this tax package was passed, so I am familiar with what went into the negotiations for it. I'm familiar with the impacts of it, and I'm familiar with a lot of the provisions in it. I will say that there are certain provisions of this that certainly need to be expanded and continued. However, we need to make sure that the average person that's living in this district, that's going to work every single day, that's working their hardest through blood, sweat, and tears to provide for their families, the long hours that they spend on an assembly line or in a grocery store or at a gas station, wherever they are, that their effective tax rate is not lower than the people who make sums of money that they will never realize in their entire life. So our tax code has to be fair. Our tax code cannot continue to put the majority of the burden on the people who can least afford to pay it, the people who need the money in their pockets the most. And so I would analyze it. I would work towards it. There are certainly business-friendly provisions in there that I do think have helped a lot. We'd make a decision and go forward.
Thank you. 30 seconds.
Also, one of the pieces of legislation that I've introduced and passed that many families are benefiting from now is the elimination of the income tax on overtime pay, which has given hourly workers an opportunity to take home a 5% pay raise since January 1. This is something I would do at the federal level, eliminating the income tax on federal, eliminating the income tax on federal as well. And so for me, you got to be able to do things to balance out. And so as I indicated earlier, that we'll have to look at negotiating down to a fair rate. But right now, I don't see us continue to put a burden on business that's barely hanging on as well.
Thank you. 30 seconds.
Look, tax cuts in a lot of circumstances, when they theoretically work, they work for the best. But what we have often seen is that the trickle-down effect doesn't often trickle down to the homes in Jackson, Alabama, or in Castleberry, Alabama. And so I want to make sure that we're advocating for tax policies that are sensible and also informed. Because, look, at the end of the day, we have far too many people in this district that really need more money in their pockets. But we also have to be mindful that these are the same people who need the programs that are there to support the people who don't quite have the income, and they need federal government there for them.
Thank you.
You know, there's been a lot of debate over the Israel and Gaza conflict and the aggressive approach taken by the government of Israel. Some say they've gone too far. Do you support Israel's actions in Gaza, and what could the U.S. do to improve that situation as a whole? Mr. Figures, we'll start with you.
Look, whenever you have war and conflict, it's never anything to be happy about, to be proud about. There's loss of life, and a single loss of life is one life too many. We obviously cannot forget what precipitated this particular event was an attack on October 7th. And Israel, as I think most of the international community has acknowledged, had a right to defend itself, and they did so. And they did so forcefully, and they did so aggressively. But listen, we have to get to a moment of peace. We have to get to a moment where the United States is taking the leadership role and ensuring everything from humanitarian aid is getting to where it's needed most, to ensuring that medical resources are getting to where they are needed most, and taking a leadership role once again and working and doing everything that we can to get to a long-term two-state solution where Israel and its surrounding neighbors can coexist in an environment of lasting peace. That is the goal, and that's the role that the United States should be playing.
Thank you. Mr. Daniels, on the topic of Israel and its tactics in Gaza, what could the U.S. do?
So I think that we have to make certain that the U.S.-Israel relationship remains strong. We've seen what NATO and others are doing to ensure assisting Israel and the United States as well. And so for me, I have the fortune of responding to the attacks from Hamas in October in a public way, of condemning the attacks on Hamas. And so I think that right now we do need to have a ceasefire in the region, especially making certain that, because there's an American that still is a hostage. And so we have to make certain that we are very careful about making certain that we're bringing the Americans back and bringing those hostages back to Israel. And so I think that when you're in conflict, you cannot, if you're not on the ground, it's hard to really measure the impact of that conflict. But whenever someone is attacking, Hamas is attacking Israel, I don't see the region being able to be stabilized at this point. And I don't necessarily agree with Netanyahu's decisions, but I do understand that when you're in conflict, it's hard to understand.
And I'm sorry, your time is up. Mr. Figures, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
I think, this is an issue that is rooted in complexities beyond the understanding of myself, of people who have not been around this issue and who are not touched by it personally. Israel is a critical American ally. It is, when you look at the map, it is in the most volatile region of the world. And there's a strategic relationship that is vitally important to the security interests of America as well. So we have to do everything that we can to ensure the security in the region in general.
And Mr. Daniels.
As I mentioned, the stability there's no way to bring stability to the region because both sides have dug in. And so I realize that. And so what we have to do as Americans, we have to make certain that we are remaining steadfast and strong with the relationship between Israel and the United States of America. And so we have to make certain that we try to get to a point, as I mentioned before, for a ceasefire to be able to get those hostages. But I cannot, as a member of Congress, I have to make certain that we are remaining steadfast and strong with our allies by any means necessary.
Thank you again. We are going to take another quick break, and when we will continue Election 2024 District 2 Democratic debate in just 2 minutes.
Fox 10 News and WSFA 12 News present Alabama's District 2 Democratic Congressional Debate.
And welcome back to our special election 2024 District 2 Democratic debate. Thank you all for being here and spending time with us this evening. We are hearing from the candidates for the April 16th runoff. We've asked a number of questions so far, and let's continue.
Our next question. Fentanyl and other drugs and overdoses are a big concern. What should the U.S. be doing to stop the number of drug overdoses in our country? We start with you, Mr. Daniels.
So we have to make certain that we're going after those that are distributing these drugs the trafficking and those in places where it originated from. Oftentimes, we're going after the person, the lower level dealer, instead of actually solving the problem. And so we have to increase our enforcement of identifying those individuals that are putting these drugs on the streets. We also have to make certain that we're putting more dollars into treatment, into opportunities to be able to get treatment, but also make investments in our school systems to kind of do like we used to do with McGruff, the crime dog. We got to be able to implement more marketing tools and exposing our children early on so that we can kind of prevent them, push them away from getting involved or even seeking drugs long term. And so we just got to do more investment overall, the treatment, the preventative side, as well as the enforcement side.
Thank you. Mr. Figures?
I worked in the Senate when the fentanyl epidemic was on the rise for a member that was in one of the hardest hit states in the country. And in that state, it was to the point where they were losing 12 people a day to fentanyl-related overdoses in the state for an extended amount of time. So this is an issue that I worked on directly in the Senate. What I know about this issue is this, is that the deadly precursors that are coming into this country, that are ultimately coming into this country, are coming from a country that we have been able to readily identify for some time now. It's China. And so the enforcement efforts certainly have to ramp up in our ability to be able to work with the Chinese government to go after the companies that are actually sending these precursors for this deadly drug into the United States of America. And I know that the Department of Justice works diligently on that, as well as our other international partners. But we have to get to the root of this problem. It is a sincere problem, and that when it hits your state, it destroys life at a rate that you cannot imagine.
Thank you. Mr. Daniels, 30 seconds.
Absolutely, and some of the fentanyl is coming through our borders as well, and so we have to make certain that we're taking a separate approach when we're working with the border to identify how the drugs are coming over to the United States through our border. Also, we have to make certain that we're doing more treatment in our high schools. We found that a lot of our students are getting access to fentanyl. We're seeing it being used tremendously. I've worked on this issue in the state legislature where we increase the enforcement of those that are dealing drugs that have fentanyl, as well as increasing the penalties.
Thank you. Mr. Figures?
Yes, listen, we have to take a measured approach, a measured and an informed and a responsible approach through a variety of facets, from the treatment side of it for people who are suffering with drug abuse to the enforcement side from people who are selling these dangerous drugs into our communities. When I worked in Congress, I actually drafted a bill because of the deadly nature of these drugs. I drafted a bill to help with the interdiction of these drugs at the actual border as they were coming across from our southern border. So this is something I'm familiar with. I know that we can get in Congress and continue these efforts, and I know that there are several members that are already fighting hard on this, and we'd look to join that fight.
Thank you. Mr. Daniels?
Yeah, we're addressing the issue here at the state legislative level, but in the congressional level, we have to put more investments in the prevention side that flows down to the states and flows down to the local communities, so that we're focusing on the preventative side, and we're also addressing the issue and those individuals that are dealing fentanyl, as well as figuring out where it's coming from. It's coming from a number of places, but we have to make certain that we're shutting that down in the beginning.
Thank you.
Well, now it is time for your closing remarks. We are out of time for the line of questioning. You will each have 60 seconds to give your last pitch to the voters. Mr. Daniels, we will start with you.
So I'm Anthony Daniels. I've been in the legislature about 10 years. I've had a tremendous amount of success in the Alabama legislature, where I've been able to pass legislation like elimination of the income tax on overtime pay. It's introduced a bill to deal with child care tax credits that will give families up to $2,000 in reimbursement or direct payment to a provider. I've also passed legislation that's able to give us an opportunity to create the cybersecurity and engineering school while supporting all of our other independent state schools. But I've also had the experience of working across the aisle and getting things done. And so if I'm in a superminority in the state of Alabama, in the legislature of the state of Alabama, imagine what I could do when the numbers are close or the Democrats are in charge. I can deliver. I have the experience and the track record of delivering for the people of the state of Alabama. Thank you.
And Mr. Figures, your closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks again to the hosts and to the Mobile Chamber for putting this event on today. Listen, we have a choice of who we can send to Washington, D.C. And I always want to err on the side of experience. And I've been there. I know what it looks like to prioritize issues. I know what priorities look like in a White House. I know what priorities look like in a federal agency. I know what priorities look like in Congress. I know what the committees look like. I know what the members look like. I know what the staff looks like. I know what it's like to work with them because I have been in the trenches with them working on almost every issue that we have discussed here tonight. At the end of the day, one luxury we do not have, is time. We need someone that can hit Washington running, that can hit the ground running full speed ahead. Washington is not Montgomery. It is an entirely different animal. And we need to have someone there with the experience of navigating Washington, D.C. And I ask you for your vote on April 16th. Thank you.
Mr. Daniels, Mr. Figures, thank you for your participation in this debate.
And a reminder that the runoff election is April 16th. Thank you both.
The Alabama District 2 Democratic Congressional Debate has been sponsored by All In Credit Union and Southern Cancer Center.